What's everyone's favorite song? Or should I say one of their favorite songs? Blessed Assurance. I like Blessed Assurance. You don't have to name your absolute favorite, but one of your favorites. Old Rugged Cross, Eibel. How about Mike? Lily of the Valley? Jeremiah? Holy, holy, holy. Tom? Love lifted me. How great thou art. Maybe we should do that. What's your mother's favorite, right? Adler, what's your favorite song? I love you, Lord. All right. Any other favorites? Tori? Because he lives. Cindy and Tori have the same favorite song. You need to apologize to her for stealing her song, Tori. Okay. Vinny? In the Garden? In the Garden. Jim? That's mine as well. One of my favorite. Johnny? How Great Thou Art. I love that song too, especially with the big giant orchestra. Oh, man. Any other favorites? Elias. What did he say? Twinkle Little Star. Okay. We got a lot of training ahead. 461. 461. He leadeth me. We'll sing all three verses. Number 2. Come thou fount of every blessing. Tune thy heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Come thou fount, wandering from the fold of God, he to rescue me from danger, bought me with his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor, daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Pierce my heart, oh, take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. Thank you, Ella. That last verse reminds me of Nitin Ingles' sermon last Sunday night. And oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I am constrained to be. And boy, that really spoke to my heart last Sunday evening about being a debtor to the gospel, okay, and to those who shared the gospel with me, and to the Lord Jesus Christ above all, to go out and to tell others about Jesus Christ. And I'm excited about Grow starting up here on Tuesday evening. And with or without a time that we meet, we all can be out there and sharing the gospel with the Lord Jesus Christ. And I pray that you are. Pray that you're strengthened by the Holy Spirit, because it's not easy to do. I pray that you're empowered by the Holy Spirit. I pray that you have the fruit of the Holy Spirit in your life, so that when you do share the gospel, your lifestyle matches the words that you say. And so many people want to talk about lifestyle evangelism. And while we need lifestyle evangelism just the same, we preached about that this morning a little bit, having our lives as an epistle. But Christian coffee has never saved anybody, okay? Well, the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. And so we've got to get out and we've got to get that message across, okay? All right. With that being done and said, I'm going to take my seat. Okay, so we are in our series. I forgot the ladies are not breaking up until just now. So the ladies are staying out here. You're all done, right? Okay. We are covering the history of the Bible from the mouth of God to the King James Version. It's been prolonged. Okay, my fault. Cindy, each week she's been moving back one row. But in the series, she'll be moving out the door the next time here, okay? Okay, so we looked at the history of the received text timeline. Then we looked at the history of the critical text timeline. And remember, it's not necessarily about the translations. Okay? When you see the translations, there's some notable differences. But it's truly about the text underneath the translations, which is why the translations are what they are. And the modern translations base themselves off of the critical text, whereas the King James Version is based off of the received text. And so we've looked at those two streams, those two rivers of text, and we see how one is filled with documented, reliable, authentic evidence and sources and people who built their ministries and their lives off the gospel, and the other is filled with lies and scandals and profiteering and fame-seeking people. And one is ancient, the other is new, and we begin to realize this is far more than just simply an easier to read version. Okay, so with that, we also gave just prior to the streams of text, well, actually during the streams of text, I kind of gave you from where we got the Bible, the autographs, the original copies, all the way down till about the fall of Constantinople. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly back up for a second or two. I got to find it here. Back up just a second or two, and I'm going to talk about early English Christianity. So what I'm going to do now, hopefully it's not going to be too long. I don't want to park too long on this area, but I want to talk about the King James Version history. Okay? How did we go from the fall of Constantinople, so to speak, or the Dark Ages, the fall of the Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church as well, to getting the King James Version, okay? And one of the things that you have to realize is English Christianity is different than Europe Christianity. And the reason why, anybody know why it's different? And when I say different, I'm talking about in the ancient times here, not necessarily today, okay? Think 1,000, in the first 1,000 years after Christ. What, Cindy? More pure or something like that. So the answer to, no is the answer. However, you have it correct inside Europe. So there's two different Europes. There's the Western Empire, which is Spain and France and all of those countries in that area, and they were Roman Catholic. And on the other side, in the Turkey area, the Constantinople, right, the eastern side, it was the Byzantine Empire. And there was two different schools of thought because of the divide in the empire. And so the eastern side was Eastern Orthodox. The Roman Catholic side was Roman Catholic. And in time, one was more Roman Catholicism, having their Latin Vulgate, and the other was Eastern Orthodox, having the Masoretic text and the received text. But inside Europe, I'm going to move to England. And does anybody know why England was different than both styles of the European Christianity in the 1,000 years or so after Christ? It's not, when you think about it, it's not that hard. And don't overthink it. It's geography related. Okay, so different languages would be one of them, for sure. The queen. The Queen. Okay, so political, just political. I wouldn't say so, but I'm not an authority on that. I don't know what they would have believed. Tom?
Wasn't there someone like head of the Westminster Abbey, like whoever that was?
Okay, so you guys are definitely, I think you guys have sway the farther we get away from the time of Christ. In other words, what prime ministers, kings, and kings would have had sway. Obviously, King James would have had a lot of sway when we get down to 1611, okay? But I'm talking more closer to the times of Christ than I would say far away. And I'll give you the answer. The English Channel. The Roman Catholic Church didn't have much sway across the English Channel. It wasn't like the world was connected. Remember when Saul took the gospel, how far does the Bible say that it went to? Not to say that it didn't cross the channel. In fact, we'll show you in a little bit. But how far did the gospel go to? Spain. Went as far as the Spain inside the Bible. So the English Channel was a huge barrier. And so when Christianity began to propagate and multiply, and then the Roman Catholic Church began its dogma in the 4th century, primarily beginning the 4th century, when it really began to pour out its heretical doctrines on the populace en masse, the English Channel stopped it, and so you had a different style of Christianity inside England, okay? In AD 700, a monk named Venerable Bede wrote what is the earliest known and still existing history of the English people, called the Ecclesiastical History of the English Nation, just in case you want to read it. Okay, in it he says that Christianity could be found in England as early as 156 AD. And so I didn't have time to quote all these other sources that talk about early Christianity inside England. So as early as 150, which is only 120 years after Christ, it was a big enough religion for historians to note in England. So somehow, some way, the gospel crossed over the English Channel. And as a matter of fact, several historians in this time frame, in these early time frames, talked about how the Roman armies could not invade England, but the gospel could. And so they were making historical notes that the Christianity was infiltrating their country, but the Roman army could not. And so you have a little bit of an awareness here that the English Christianity was starting to blossom, and then eventually the English would be conquered by the Holy Roman Empire. The Crusades eventually would cross the channel, and eventually it would tie in kings and queens and prime ministers, and they began to be embroiled in a huge political battle. It was over money, and it was over power, and it was over land. And so by now, the Roman Catholic Church, and I would say by now, I would say by the 1000s or so, first millennium, going into the second millennium, the Roman Catholic Church is seizing land and seizing land and seizing land. And of course, it was in 1454, I don't have my notes right in front of me, I believe it was 1454 when the Ottomans conquered the Constantinople, and so all of a sudden you had a huge insurgents coming in, okay? So just kind of set the stage here a little bit. Christianity was different, but the Roman Catholic Church in time crosses and puts its heavy footprint on the land of England, okay? People like St. Patrick. I know Kayla's going to Ireland here in about a month or so, and they're doing a film on St. Patrick. Who was St. Patrick? Well, the Roman Catholics claim him, right? And boy, they celebrate him, blah, blah. Well, they stole him. St. Patrick was around the year 400 AD. He preached salvation by grace through faith alone. He baptized adults by immersion and started over 300 local churches in Ireland, and history's all rewritten. And the Roman Catholic Church have usurped him into their Hall of Fame, so to speak. And it's just a great example of how the Roman Catholic Church today seems as though they own all of these great saints in times past, but it's not the case. You had Christianity prior to them. The problem with the early Christianity was the language. And the English barrier, just as much as it was a barrier to the English Channel, was just as much as it was a barrier for things coming in, it was a barrier for things going out. And it wasn't like there was a massive translation team for books and other things like this. And so during these centuries, there was no complete English translation of the scriptures. And why was there no English translation? Well, lack of overall education resulted in very low literacy rates. Don't forget, it was called the Dark Ages in Europe. Okay, so education was being suppressed. As a matter of fact, they were being tortured and persecuted if you disagreed with the prevailing thought. In the English, it was just pure illiteracy. The peasantry of that day was very, very poor. And there was a lack of educated men there was a lack of educated men to translate the scriptures. Okay? There was a lack of technology and a lack of industrialization to make cheap copies of the scriptures. And a person, this is kind of, it's kind of hand in hand, because it's not like somebody, oh man, if I could invent a printing press in the year 1200 instead of the year 1400, I would have been a millionaire. Not really. You probably would have gone bankrupt, because eyeglasses weren't even invented yet. And so the average person, how many of you wear glasses? All of you could not have read. Because even if they could have a printing press, you wouldn't have been able to see its pages. So eyeglasses had, that was coming in around 1200, 1300s, around the 1300s or so, was eyeglasses would begin to. All of that plays a part, though. Electricity, having the light to be able to read, all of this stuff works together. So it was kind of like low literacy, lack of educated men to translate, a lack of technology, all produced reasons as to why we didn't really have a full English translation on this side of the English Channel for some 1200 years or so. Okay? There were partial translations. They have it documented that the Psalms was translated into English by the year 700. The Gospels had been translated in the year 766. The books of Exodus and Acts were translated by Alfred the Great in 850. I don't know why those two books, but he must have got a copy of these and translated them. The Gospels again, and the book of Acts again by the year 1200, and the book of Psalms again by William of Shoreham in 1320. So you had a handful of books by the year 1320 that have been translated, but by and large, the majority of the Bible had not yet been translated, at least known to us at anywhere given time, in the English language. Until, not King James, the morning star of the Reformation, John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe. So this is where this man comes. How many of you have heard his name before? John Wycliffe. Okay. Who was he? This is who he is. This is the setting he's coming into. Okay. He's in the year He's born in 1330. And he was born on an English sheep farm. He was brilliant. He enrolled at Oxford University at the age of 15. Now, keep in mind, Oxford in England was, Cambridge wasn't there yet. I don't believe it was there yet. Oxford was really the only university there. It was established in 1096, and it was very hard to get into. He enrolled at the age of 15 years old. Okay, and his studies were interrupted by the bubonic plague. And this is right at that time of the Black Death, the bubonic plague. And you forget, but over 40%, 4 out of 10 people died in England in the bubonic plague. This is right during his lifetime. By the way, it came back. It came back in 1331. No, I can't remember when it came back. But anyway, it came back in a different year. 1331 doesn't make sense. It came back in a different year as well. So it was round 2. And again, it was like another high 30% remaining were killed. So you're talking probably close to 50% total in the land of England were killed by the bubonic plague. So this was a very widespread disease that was killing the population right at the time that John Wycliffe was enrolled at Oxford, and so he had to put his studies on pause. But eventually, by the year of 1374, at the age of 36 years old, John Wycliffe had completed his doctorate and was serving as rector in the parish of Lutterworth. Rector, if you will, is kind of like a pastor, right? He was like a bishop, a rector of a parish in Lutterworth. He had graduated and he had mastered natural science, math, theology, ecclesiastical law, philosophy, history, Roman, and English law. Take that, modern scholars, okay? So here's a man who was a brilliant man at 36 years old and basically gives his life to the church. And by the end of his life, he is so fed up with the Roman Catholic Church for all of its false doctrines, beliefs, practices, and the last 10 years of his life, he goes on a rampage on the Roman Catholic Church. Now, he also, for those of you who want to combine world history, this is also the time of the captivity of Babylon for the papacy. So you had the 100-year war with France, and the papacy had moved from Rome to, how do you say that? Avignon? How do you say that name? In France. Avignon? Avignon. How do you say that? Anybody know how to say that? Thank you. Okay. I'll go with Cybels. Avignon, I think it is. Avignon. Okay, it moved over to Avignon. 7 different popes are in that time. So the papacy and the political powers of its day are beginning to clash. Up until this time, it was ruled by the Roman Catholic churches across Europe. Okay, and in England as well. So they're beginning to clash. There's beginning to be some friction going on right at the time that Wycliffe is beginning to call out all of these false doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. And one of his main thrusts was that the scriptures were to be in the hands of the laity. And the Roman Catholic Church said, no way. No way. In fact, I wanted to bring in a whole bunch of quotes. We wouldn't have time. But you should see what these Roman Catholic higher-ups were saying about that idea in the days of Wycliffe. They were saying, if it happens, we're done. Of course they're done. If the scriptures get out, the Roman Catholic Church is done. Okay, and the word of the Lord will be the final word. Okay, and I hope that some people will see the light and come out of it. So that's really one of his main components in the last 10 years of his life. If it hadn't been for these last 10 years of his life, Wycliffe probably would have been another no-name scholar that history forgets about. There probably was brilliant scholar after brilliant scholar that nobody's ever heard. But because of his defense of the truth, he is remembered. And he began to gain a following. And they called his followers babblers or mutterers, or in the English language at that time, lollards. That's what they called them. How do you know that? History, okay. Lollards, okay. It was a mock name. It seems like there's a common thread. Christians was a mock name. Lollards was a mock name. Baptists were a mock name. And go down the list. Holy Holly, okay, was a mock name. Okay, she's mad at me now, folks. Let's just go back to my notes. Okay, okay, mock names. And they began to mock them. And later on, he would be called the Morning Star of the Reformation, but not at this time. He began, due to his desire, he began to translate the Latin Vulgate into modern English, into the common vernacular. And so he didn't know Greek. He didn't know, as brilliant as he was, Greek was really a lost language to the English. As a matter of fact, years down the road, they actually during this time, so to speak, but years down the road, they would say that Greece, the Greek Empire was being revived by the hand of Christians because they were bringing in the Greek manuscripts. And we'll get to this a little bit later, okay? So anyway, so he sets out to translate the Latin Vulgate into modern English, and he dies before he finishes it. So obviously it was the last 10 years of his life. I'm glad he started, but he started too late. Didn't get to finish it. So a Lollard, one of his followers by the name of John Purvey, picks up the book and continues. They imprison him in the year 1390, and another Lollard picks it up to finish the book. And that Lollard's name was John Huss. Have you ever heard that name before? Okay, so now you're starting to put together these names in a storyline form. Okay, so John Huss. And he resumes the work, and of course he is caught, and he is burned at the stake in the year 1415. Fox's Book of Martyrs talks about him, and he died quoting from the Psalms and praying for his killers. That was John Huss. I read two different accounts. I don't know which one is true. 43 or 76 years after Wycliffe's death, the Catholics went and exhumed his body, and his remains were burned. That's how much he was hated. He died of a stroke. Wycliffe died naturally. But 43 or 76 years later, anyway, several decades later, they exhume his dead body and burn his remains and scatter them on the river Avon. Talk about hating the Bible. And that is what it comes down to. It was not the doctrines. You should hear what Wycliffe was saying about the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, it was like, these are like repeatable lines. You think Donald Trump times 10 against the Roman Catholic Church. And then think about what the Chuck Schumer against Donald Trump times 10 of the Catholic Church saying about Wycliffe in their day. But in his day, he never got burned. He never got fiercely persecuted. But when it came to the translation of the Bible, that's why they killed. That's why they imprisoned people. That is why they burned people at the stake. It was the translation of the Bible. It was the whole idea that the Bible could get into the hands of the people. Okay? And so, the Wycliffe translates the Bible. Now, there's some limitations to John Wycliffe's Bible. Okay? Number one, it would take about 10 months for a full-time scribe to make a copy, because it was still by hand. It was still by hand. So if a copy was to be caught and burned, there went 10 months. And now, because of the time it took, okay, then it was extremely expensive to own a Bible. And so it was very common amongst the Christians to rent Bibles. And you could rent it by the hour. That's how long you basically had. And they would charge you a bale of hay, probably to feed the animals, for 1 hour to rent the Bible. Okay? So probably more than what happened is Lollards would gather, they'd rent a Bible, and they would read it. Or they would copy it. One of the two. And it just shows you the limitations of Wycliffe's Bible. And another limitation on it was that it was translated from the Latin Vulgate. So it was great that we had something, but it was the Latin Vulgate. Okay? So something radically changed in the year 1454. See here. I don't know if I have, okay, 1415, Huss is killed. So about 40 years after John Huss died, or you can say after 40 years of the completion of Wycliffe's Bible, what dynamically changes the entire scene for the world, but primarily for Europe and England? It was not geography in this case. In this case, it's actually science, or if you will, an invention. The printing press. Now, truth be told, I actually don't know the difference, but everybody says Johann Gutenberg did not invent the printing press. He only improved it, okay? But he improved it in such a way that everybody thinks he invented it, okay? But he did invent a better ink, which lasted, and everything else and whatnot. But Johannes Gutenberg, in the year 1455, he invents the printing press, and you should read his story. It's just a fascinating story in and of itself. It's going to be one of my next books that I read, I think, just kind of get a little bit more history on him. And right before going right before going bankrupt, you know, he finally has enough money to print the first Bible. The first book he ever printed on the printing press was the Latin Vulgate, and he prints it out, and history has changed. And so now, what was taking 10 months to produce one copy, you could produce thousands of copies, depending on how many printing presses were active here. Okay, and then 1 year before this, I should have put this in a different order. I messed this up here. Right before the printing press, so 1 year, if not the same year, the printing press, the Turks invade Constantinople. And they changed the name to, not Turkey, Istanbul, okay? Istanbul, from Istanbul to Constantinople. Okay, I don't know if you know that song or not, but to Istanbul, okay? And what happens? Why is that such a massive thing? That Turkey, way over here, we're actually way over here on the English side, and you've got the Dark Ages in the middle of Europe, you know, Spain and France and all these areas, and then way over here in Asia Minor and in Turkey and in all these other areas, you got the Ottoman Empire. Why is the fall of the Eastern Empire critical in the relation to the Bible? I'm asking hard questions tonight, man. Mike says, I've had enough. I'm leaving on this. Okay, so keep in mind the Greeks, the Eastern Empire, okay, they had rejected Roman Catholic doctrine, right? They rejected the Latin Vulgate. Remember that? They were known for their scriptoriums, where they had scribes, and they held to which text? The critical text or the received text? The received text. And so 1 year before the printing press gets discovered or invented, the Ottomans take over, and when the Ottomans take over, all of the Greek Orthodox scholars put on their tennis shoes and start running for the West. And as they run, they grab their manuscripts. All of their Greek received text manuscripts, and they're running for the border. And they get over there. It's not that boring, Leah. Okay. Okay. So they run for the border, and they bring with them all of their Greek manuscripts right 1 year before the printing press is invented. Okay. And it takes you to that the printing press is discovered in 1455, and then 14 years later, a man by the name of Erasmus is born. So I hope I'm putting together this puzzle for you. Okay? Wycliffe, first Bible translation. Huss completes it. English translation. Huss completes it. And then the Gutenberg, the fall of Constantinople happens. All of these Greek scholars with their Greek manuscripts come flooding into the European Dark Ages over there, and then the Gutenberg press is invented, making the Bible now proliferate. And then here comes a man by the name of Erasmus. He was born in the year 1469, and he collects and he publishes the first Greek New Testament in the year 1516, which is 1 year before Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses on the door. So now all these Greek manuscripts are coming in, and he's like, man, we're tired of the Latin Vulgate. We want to see Greek. It was being revived. We want to see the originals. And so Erasmus begins his journey to go and collect all of these Greek documents into one book. He wants all of the New Testament into one book, not separate letters floating around everywhere from different people. And that's where he begins his great work. And of course, we'll get into this a little bit later, but it was Erasmus's work, which was later perfected, if you will, by John Beza, okay? And it was Beza's whatever edition of that the King James translators would have used for the received text to base their translation off of, okay? So that is Erasmus. And then Martin Luther in 1534, so just 15 years later, we're kind of working like 15-year increments, right? Nora, what do you got? Some pictures there? Okay. So you got Wycliffe, and then, 15 or so, let's see here, Wycliffe, and then you have Gutenberg in 1455. Okay, so what year? Okay, so Huss died in 1415. And then about 40 years later, Gutenberg press happened, same with Constantinople. And then another 15 years later, here comes Erasmus. And then another 15 years after Erasmus's Greek New Testament is printed, Martin Luther takes Erasmus's Greek text and he translates the Bible into the German language. By the way, the German translation of Martin Luther is still used to this day. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And there isn't any cry to make it easier to read in German. And they stick to the stuff over there, okay? So that's 1534, and then you have kind of overlapping a little bit, so we're going to scale back a little bit. So we got up to 1534. We're going to step back just a few years into 1483, because during this time, William Tyndale was born. This is unbelievable. You could almost say that this entire time, God orchestrated for the protection, preservation, and proliferation of the entire scriptures. It's just unbelievable how all of this just coincided. Is too perfect for anybody to say that it was nothing short of a miracle. And he used the church. He used key men and ladies to translate the scriptures, to propagate the scriptures. Lollards, they call them, right? Anabaptists, they called them. Go down the list. Moravians, Waldensians, eventually Baptists, okay? Go down the list. There's a lot more. And it's not just, not just one group of people. There's all kinds of people that he used, but the church, Christians who formed these local assemblies that he used to protect the scriptures in front of all this persecution. Okay, so in 1483, which is 1 year after Luther was born, okay, 100 years after the death of John Wycliffe. So, Seibel, who was born 100 years ago? What year would he have been? 1921, the Roaring 20s. Right? So it'd been like somebody who lived in the Roaring 20s for us, okay? So you have 100 years since Wycliffe has died. William Tyndale is born in England. He graduates from Oxford in 1515 at the age of 32. He studied theology at Oxford, and after his graduation from Oxford, he was horrified to discover that the entire theology course that he took and graduated from, there was no course in scriptures. There's a problem with that. That's what William Tyndale thought. He was like, I just graduated with theology, and we never had one course on the scriptures. And theology then being simply a study of what learned men had written about the Bible and God. So they studied all the church fathers, and that's primarily it, or if you will, the dogma of the fathers of the Roman Catholic Church. And so here he was going to become a teacher of the scriptures, and he only got the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, if you will, the priests. And he was a gifted man. Remember how we talked about God in gifting Bezalel to design the arks of the covenant and all the other furniture pieces? Well, I believe he gifts William Tyndale because he was a gifted linguist and was fluent in French, Greek, Hebrew, German, Italian, Latin, Spanish, and English. Okay. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He knew 7 more languages than I do. Okay, that's it. 7 more. Okay. Okay. So he was an unbelievable language guy. And right about this time, upon his graduation from Oxford, he comes across and discovers Erasmus's Greek New Testament. And he reads it. And when he reads Erasmus's New Testament, he gets saved from reading the scriptures. And he begins to soak himself in the scriptures, in the original languages, and he begins to desire that the translation of the Word of God get into the hands of every single person, from the poorest boy to the oldest and richest person, right? And so he begins and he starts translating, but immediately upon translating, he gets political pressure. Henry VIII. He wants a divorce. And the Pope is saying, no divorce, okay? And so he wants to break away. Anyway, a lot of political talk here, so we'll just get down to the chest. He flees. William Tyndale flees. Where does he run to? Zurich, Spain. Both incorrect.
Germany.
Germany. Why don't you just finish the rest of the lesson there, Jim? Okay. Now, Germany. Okay. He runs to Germany, particularly to Wittenberg, which is the home of who? Martin Luther. I heard Ella go, Martin Luther. So he gets protected by a duke there, a political person, gets protected there. And so he begins to translate the Greek New Testament from the Greek into the English. And that was in the year, let's see here, do I have a time frame? Well, he graduates in the year 1515. And so probably right around the same time that Martin Luther, I don't have the exact year here, had translated his into the German language, okay? And he completes the New Testament translation rather hastily, and he prints the first 3,000 copies. And he distributes these, and you should hear the Catholic Church right now. I mean, all kinds of quotes. If you just Google this, William Tyndale up, you can read all the quotes you want, okay? By the way, for those of you who go to the Pennsylvania State Capitol and you walk into the governor's waiting room, what do they call the banner like that runs across the top of the walls? Like a border? Yeah, the border of the entire state is the story of William Tyndale. So you can follow the whole story, and it ends with him being burned here. But it's just a fascinating, right here in our state capitol, at the governor's, if you go to visit the governor and you're waiting in the waiting room, you could follow this whole story. You're like, oh yeah, look at this. So first 3,000 copies are distributed. Now, what a difference from John Wycliffe. So we now have a translation from the original Greek, Erasmus's Greek New Testament. 3,000 copies are distributed. Within a year or two or a few, 50,000 copies are in circulation. Okay? And so he begins to translate the Old Testament. And persecution is still happening. He's fleeing for his life all the time. He's on the move. And he oftentimes would lose entire books of translations. You think about these things. And he would just pick up the pen and start all over again. He would flee, literally sometimes with seconds to live. He would flee. And he would lose the entire book or books that he was translating from the Old Testament. In 1528, he was in the city of Antwerp, Belgium. He was completely broke, and he was unable to continue the Old Testament translation work. He had no money and no possible way to continue. That is until his arch enemy, the Bishop of London, Tunstall, in his hatred and in his zeal, told his servants to go and buy every copy of William Tyndale's New Testament so that he could burn it. So William Tyndale, through some mediators, unbeknownst to them, gets all his copies that he has and sells them all the New Testament copies that he has. And Tunstall, the Bishop of London, burns them all. And Fox's Books of Martyr tells the story of Tyndale's response. He says this: the bishop had the books, and I had the money. I am gladder, for these two benefits shall come out of it. I shall get money to bring myself out of debt, and the whole world will cry out against the burning of God's word. The overplus of the money that remains shall enable me to correct the said New Testament, and then newly print the same again, and I trust the second will be much better than ever was the first printed. So he takes the money from all of these New Testaments because he had discovered some errors in there, and he takes all the money that Tunstall gave him, unbeknownst to him, and he takes it and produces a better version of the first. And then he's also able to continue translating the Old Testament. And unfortunately, he is betrayed by a friend. And in 1535, he is arrested and imprisoned. And then for some unbeknownst reason, he's allowed to live for 18 months. And he's kept in a dungeon. And all he asked for was his Hebrew Bible, his Hebrew grammar, and his Hebrew dictionary. And over the next 18 months, he works on translating the Old Testament from the Hebrew to the English. And then he was, on October the 6th, 1536, he is burned at the stake. And before he's burned, he was able to complete the books of the Bible, Genesis through 2 Chronicles. So that's how far he was able to get in the Old Testament. Fox's Book of Martyrs gives the story of his death. It says, brought forth to the place of execution, he was tied to the stake, strangled by the hangman, and afterwards consumed with fire at the town of Vilvoorde, AD 1536. Crying at the stake with a fervent zeal and a loud voice, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. That was his dying prayer. Open the King of England's eyes. Isn't it ironic that it's called the King James Version of the Bible? And if you study the King James out and you look at William Tyndale's translation, William Tyndale's translation, I can't give you an exact percentage because I don't know it, but it's well over 50, if not 80% of the King James is William Tyndale's translation. I mean, he was an unbelievable scholar and he knew how to translate and poetically translate. He knew how to put the words succinctly, without length, and think through the Beatitudes. Blessed are they that mourn. All of these things. Tyndale's words, just phenomenal. Well, easy to memorize. And of course, before the King James Version, within 1 year of William Tyndale's death, it was King Henry VIII, the man who started his persecution in the first place, but he would sanction the printing of 2 English Bibles. The first was the Bishop's Bible, and he dedicates the Bible to himself, and he changes it into the pulpits. Okay, and we're going to get into these Bibles now. We're going to follow these. There's a fast slew of Bibles that happened between the years 1536 and 1611. And you probably have heard some of these names before, like the Matthew's Bible or the Coverdale Bible or the Britches Bible, all these things like that, the Bishop's Bible. You'll see all these Bibles come out, and then the King James Version is the final crown that comes out of this whole entire splash. Okay? So from John Wycliffe to William Tyndale today, I think that's enough for the brain. Okay, so let's close in a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed.